Good morning and welcome to the 86th Mastering the Machine webinar for the 10th of May, 2025. Our topic today was system integration. I know I did this a few months ago, but this is on a little more modern systems integration than the previous webinar, and there's some good little gems in here. A few people joined, and we got to talk, and I hope you enjoy it. Good morning, folks, and welcome to the 86th Mastering the Machine webinar for the 10th of May, 2025. Our topic today is system integration. And yes, this image was created with AI. I bought Galaxy AI for the year. It's about $15 a month, and it has all kinds of video generation capability and text generation, and I've used it a few times. It's come in pretty useful, but I thought it was a pretty cool image. So what is the Automation Academy and Mastering the Machine? Well, the Automation Academy is a website. It's a membership website where I put some training videos for Allen Bradley, Siemens, Beckhoff, and Omron, put some job and aptitude assistance based on the Ken Coleman show from the Ramsey Network, have some systems integration tips and some videos, things like that. We do have a library of training and technical documents and some software that you can download, including PLC software. We do have a community with some interest groups called IO Central. And we do have these regular events like the Mastering the Machine webinars and other training events. And you can find all of these at these websites that you see here. Mastering the Machine itself was named after a document that I put out, gosh, it's been probably 13 years now, about systems integration, machine building, documenting, and how large machine builders quote machinery for companies. One of the things I like to mention here is that it's not all just about PLCs. There are a lot of building blocks that it takes to get to the point where you can study PLC programming, and a lot of folks advertising PLC programming, of course, lots and lots of training programs for that, but there's a lot of things that are prerequisites before you even get into programming PLCs, and a lot of these things are covered in PLC classes, like numbering systems, data manipulation, things like that. And we kind of start at the very bottom with the basics in high school and things like that. And we move up, if we're lucky, get to study some electricity, electronics, things like that. Maybe after we get to a junior college, we start studying maybe systems integration specific topics like you see here, and eventually do get to the point where we can take, PLC classes, things like that. Lots and lots of PLC classes online you can find. I'm not the only person who puts those out there, but you do need to know a lot of these lower level things before you do get into PLC programming. As you get higher in this pyramid, some of these things are a lot more specialized, and some of them are new topics like industrial Internet of Things. Of course, ERP and MES have been out for a long time, but AI and machine learning is more of a newer topic. So that's, as you get higher in the pyramid, you do tend to specialize a little more. So today's topic, I did this kind of old school systems integration stuff a few months ago. This one is on kind of a little more of a current topic of systems integration. And one of the reasons that I'm covering this topic is because I have been getting into more systems integration. Of course, down in Miami, I do a lot of work for American Beverage Depot and get to integrate a lot of their machines. But I see David Turner's on here, for instance. I am working with him for a company that's up where he's from on a little bit of systems integration, and we had a meeting up there yesterday. I'm not going to talk specifically about that particular application, but at the end of this webinar, I do have some thoughts about evaluating systems integration jobs and things like that. So one of the first things that I'd like to discuss is, what are the formal definitions of systems integration? I've always thought of it as tying different systems together. That's basically the idea behind it. So certainly, PLCs are part of that in a lot of cases. But there's a lot of other software that you have to get into. Probably the most basic would be HMIs, which interface with PLC. So if you're going to learn PLC programming, a lot of times you may have an integrated software for your HMIs built into your PLC software. That's common in, even Allen Bradley has that now in their RSView Studio, RS Logic Studio. They do have integrated HMI software now. It is not the same as the PanelView Pluses that you used to program, right? You would have FactoryTalk View ME to program the PanelView Pluses, and then they have another family of HMIs that you can program for within Studio. Siemens has had that for a long time. WinCC is built into TI Portal, and that's a good way to put together even SCADA systems. You can buy a license for that, and everything can be all integrated within Siemens. So that's kind of a mini, systems integration tool. You're doing both the HMI, tying that into your PLC program, but the formal definition of it. So I just looked it up online yesterday and popped up the process of combining different software applications, hardware components, and data sources into a unified and cohesive system. This does make sense because it brings the hardware into it. Now, in the Wikipedia definition down at the bottom, you'll see that they really talked a lot more about computing systems and software, and didn't talk so much about the hardware and all the different components that you might get into, but combining those computing systems and software applications physically or functionally to act as a coordinated whole. And that's true. You do want things to be all coordinated and work together as well as possible. But a lot of times what ends up happening is you end up gluing together a lot of systems, and it's not necessarily originally thought of as a cohesive whole, as they mentioned here, a coordinated whole. It just ends up with a lot of things kind of connected together without initial design, kind of like a big octopus. So defined in engineering as the bringing together component subsystems into one system, aggregation of subsystems, cooperating so that the system is able to deliver the overarching functionality, but sometimes it wasn't planned originally, and so it just kind of grows. So those are the definitions that you get if you type in online, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later here. This is one of the network models that I use sometimes to illustrate different levels of components, right? So PLCs you see here at the control level, kind of in the middle, and then sometimes they talk about the field level, and these are a little more intelligent devices like machine vision systems that often have their own programming software. Remote I/O generally doesn't have its own programming software, but it can in the case of things like I/O Link. Sometimes you can put some smart devices out there. I've got VFDs and servos in here because, again, they could have their own software, or the software could be built into the PLC. And then down at the device level, these rarely have software attached to them. They do have configuration that has to be done. So you have to integrate it from the standpoint of, well, you can see this little sensor here. It may have a button on it. You may have some teach points and things. And you can communicate those teach points all the way up to the PLC level. You could, for instance, put teach capability into the HMI, which then talks to the PLC and goes all the way down to the device level. So tying all these systems together would fall under the definition of system integration. When you get up into the supervisory and production level, that's where you find your SCADA systems, and that's typically about as high as I usually go. Down in Miami, I do sometimes have to work at the enterprise level. They do have their own manufacturing execution systems, or MES systems. They have built their own, so I'm not necessarily tying it into something that is a CAN system. I don't think they wanted to pay for something like SAP. Right, SAP is more of an enterprise level system, and they just kind of built their own because they didn't want to be beholden to some company and be paying a subscription. So they built all that into Ignition. And tying that together would certainly fall under the systems integration model. So this model is from one of my books. I've seen things like this, and I kind of put together my own conglomeration of this just to illustrate, put an Allen Bradley PLC on one side, put a Siemens system on the other side. And typically you would have something like, ideally, you would like to separate these two systems. So putting something like a router in here and making sure that this is on one network and this Siemens system would be on a different network. And if they need to talk to each other, they could go up to this TCP/IP level, but then you're going to have problems like non-determinism, right? These things would be talking to each other over TCP/IP, which is a non-deterministic system, and they would take an undetermined amount of time to communicate messages to each other, depending on how much traffic you have on the network. Now, if you want to put it on a CIP-based system, then you would have some determinism. You could, for instance, set your messaging to something like 200 to 500 milliseconds. You would be getting pretty real-time information at that point without overloading the network, right? So that's why this network shows everything all connected together. But you wouldn't want to do that at this lower level. You wouldn't want to put these PLCs, unless they really need to exchange information directly with each other, on the same network down here, right? Some of the things that I do at AVD, and I brought this up because this is where I've done most of my systems integration, I would say, in the last 10 years. And I'm involved, we counted up somewhere around 18 projects right now, and none of them are what I would call critical. None of them have to be done at a specific time. You can see here these zone 3 conveyors. Well, since I programmed the zone 1 and 2 conveyors, it was a kind of a natural thing to bring me in on creating this nice zone 3, which is between another project that I have is a B&R shrink wrapper system that they're just putting in to replace an old 80s era PCS7 system. It was so old that if things break, they actually can't get parts, and we would have had to take things down for weeks. And so we've replaced it with a brand new B&R system. The problem was that none of us know B&R. So I am taking a class in that on June the 3rd through the 5th, and I'm going to learn everything there is to know, hopefully, about B&R. I'm hoping it's not just a really basic class where they just cover ladder logic and things like that. I really want to learn a little more about especially their motion control. That's something that they're known for. I've heard that B&R is a little bit harder to learn, so that's part of the integration part of this. Really, the only things I have to do right now with this zone is the same things I was doing with the previous zone, which is talking to the system saying, "Are you running?" And obviously, I could just monitor that with PhotoEyes, and I can tell, well, if there's parts coming out of the shrink wrapper, I know it's running, right? I don't necessarily have to monitor it as far as its status. However, I do need to bring that into the ignition system and tell what it, is it running? And you can see this up here. I have a kind of a big map started of the entire plant. And what I'm hoping to do, you can see here, CIP still needs to be brought into this. Need to know what the status of the CIP is. Is it running? Are they doing CIP on one of the lines? I'll put the line number that they're doing the CIP here. And you can see a couple things that are faulted. And that's a little bit misleading in this system because the PET line, when the palletizer, when a line's not running, they just put the palletizer, they just hit the E-stop. And so it's not running, but the entire line is not running. So I really want that to reflect the status of the whole line. And this is the PET line that you see here. And it doesn't run a lot lately, unless they're making water, which they're making a lot less water bottles now because they can't compete with the big boys. You'll see this down most of the time. But one of the things that we're talking about doing is putting these 3 lines statuses and actually having contests between the different people running the different lines, and they can compete against each other and see who has the best production for the day. And that's one of those incentives. There's a machine vision system we may be putting right in here. One of the problems with integrating this is the camera probably needs to be up and outside of the machine, looking down into the machine, which means that you have to deal with the lighting, the plant lighting, instead of just lighting inside of the machine. We have to put it up really high so that you can see over the edges of these pieces here. So machine vision is one of the things that is an integration, right? You have to tie in, say, a Cognex or a Keyence vision system into, in this case, I want to say it's an Allen-Bradley PLC, so that should be pretty easy. They have add-on instructions that make that pretty straightforward. Let's see, down here, just put these in last time. This is ignition. This is the ignition screen, and you can bring up the individual tabs for each pasteurizer. And I spent a lot of time drawing. That's one of the things that you have to do in system integration sometimes, is drawing this system. And I just drew this within ignition. I just created little shapes and overlaid them. You can see here, this is meant to be I think the heat exchangers are down here. You can see product, hot, product to product, and then product to cold. And the people that work there know what these things are. But if they didn't, one of the things I might have done is, if you hover over it, I might have put a tooltip there. That's a kind of a good integration thing that would pop up a message saying, what is this system, right? What does P-H stand for? So putting tooltips and things like that is part of the documentation part of integration. Here's an integration job, right? This is a power factor monitor. And I captured this and I sent it to the plant owner because I just happened to be watching it. And all of a sudden I watched the voltage jump, I don't know, 8 to 10 volts here, all three phases at the same time. And that probably came from the power company, but wouldn't that be a good thing to know? So we put the power monitor in there. And the interesting thing about integrating this is old school. This was Modbus. And a lot of times you will have to use Modbus because these third-party vendors, they consider integration with an industrial system to simply be Modbus. They won't make it native, for instance, to an Allen-Bradley or Siemens system. They'll just say, well, Modbus pretty much covers everything. And I've seen that in power monitors. I've seen that in scales. Mettler Toledo, for a while, the only way that they could interface with PLC systems was Modbus. And Modbus is not really something that Allen-Bradley does natively or Siemens does natively. So you kind of have to, a lot of times, put an intermediary device like an RTA, real-time automation, makes protocol converters. ProSoft makes protocol converters. So a lot of times you'll have to put some kind of an interface in there to convert it to something that's native to what you're doing. Another nice thing to use there would be Kepware, right? Kepware makes all kinds of drivers for different communication protocols. And in systems integration, you would need a lot of times to convert a protocol to a different protocol. This screen, I always thought this was an interesting screen. It's another overview of the entire plant. It doesn't have a map of the plant, but it does show all of these lines, right? All of the Tetra Pak lines. You can see the different things on there. They are slightly different, each one. When you see something like this is an indication that the driver itself is not working. So we do not have recent tags for the TBA19. That kind of is because these are GE 9030s. They're very old. And a lot of times the communication will overload the processor. It will actually make it fault. So I believe that's why communications is down on this. It would load the processor to the point that the scan time would exceed the watchdog timer. That's one of the things you'll learn if you have to integrate old equipment, is they're monitoring internally the scan time of those PLCs. And if it exceeds a certain amount, it will actually shut it down. So good thing to know. So these are all the projects I'm involved with down there. Pretty typical mid-sized plant here. They got about 100 and some employees, and I don't know what the square footage is, but lots and lots of different things to have to connect together here. And about 10 years ago, they put Ignition in, and that's where I really started getting into making fun, pretty screens. That's something I enjoyed doing. I showed this before. This is a little, it kind of illustrates systems integration in that there was a computer here, there was a PLC here, there was an HMI here, and then there was all this fun communication stuff. Now, the customer for this, in this case, was CrowdStrike, and they know a lot more about this communication stuff than I did. So they did all the configuration of this after I shipped the machine. I don't really know a lot once you get up into this high-level computer stuff. I am definitely not an IT guy. So that's kind of where I need to get help for systems integration. A lot of times I'll have to bring other people in on the IT end. I was able to configure this computer, get it up and running pretty well. It was Windows 11 Professional, I believe. And I now have my first Windows 11 computer, so I'm kind of learning that as I go. But the rest of this stuff, I kind of talked about this on a previous webinar. This was not as simple, even though this platform, the unified HMIs, was built into the software. It was not as straightforward as you might think to program this. I had version 18, and there were all kind of version problems. I think the first thing I had to do was upgrade. I had version 2 and had to upgrade to version 3. And then I upgraded to version 5, and that didn't work. I even had the vendor out here. And so we downgraded back to version 3. We got it to work. I don't remember all the driver problems, but again, now part of documentation, I wrote all that down. One of the things that's very important to do as you're doing a job is to document what you're doing and ideally turn that over to the customer. Right? You want to create documentation as you go and put it not in a handwritten form, but some kind of a typed up document so that they can refer back to it. I've been doing that at ABD for a long time. I don't know how much they use that documentation, but it's really important from my standpoint. You can see a folder back here. I use these folders all the time to do my handwritten things, and then I create either screenshots and written documentation of what things are. Big part of integration. This system I put together, again, it represents more of a machine, but there was some integration. This was a Keyence vision system, and you can't see it here, but there's also a Cognex vision system on here. So I allowed both of those to communicate to both this Allen Bradley PLC, and you can see all these cables here. You could unplug the cables from the Allen Bradley PLC and plug it into a Siemens PLC over on this side. You can't see that part, but had a Siemens S7-300 here and had an Allen Bradley. I believe this is it appears to be a CompactLogix. It's probably a version 20 CompactLogix here. And this I did back in 2017. And it was for training students, right? I would have them program this, and I've kind of talked about this machine before, where I would drop balls into these boxes, index the boxes down, use a pick and place, inspect the boxes here, and make sure that you didn't put the wrong colored balls in these tracks, right? You would make sure that the recipe, you would put 3 different colors in here, and that the recipe that you put in here had the right number of little balls in the trays. This was actually a pretty complicated application on the vision end, because the balls could be anywhere, and they weren't actual balls, they were beads, and so they could have holes in them. One of the trickiest ones, I would fill them full of basketballs, soccer balls, and I believe it was baseballs, and you had to differentiate between those. And as the beads rolled, sometimes they had the hole up, and you couldn't really tell that it wasn't as simple as locating a soccer ball. It was a soccer bead, and it could have a hole in it, and it could not, depending on how it rolled, right? And where it was in there. So you had to locate it, you had to count the items, and then you had to reject it if it was the wrong item. So a lot of times systems integration obviously includes quality control. You want to look at whether something passes or fails as an inspection, and indicate that somehow, right? Create a screen for it and indicate it somehow. Okay, so this kind of is a new concept, and I kind of base this, I see David on here, and it's a little bit on when you get into a new job for you, and in the case of something I'm working on with David, it's a new job to me. It's a new job, I guess, to David too, probably within the last year, but it's not a new system. It's an existing system. So let's say, and that's why I put an old guy here, because I'm an old guy and it's an old system. And sometimes when you get into an old system, you have to kind of take it apart. This illustrates that, and you have to figure out what it is, right? And then you have to evaluate, there's some considerations. Let's say you're a small company like myself. I've been anywhere from 15 people all the way down to one person. And financially, I put this on my blog. I wrote a blog in about 2011 called The Bite Too Big to Chew. And that is what happened to my old company. Okay. I had a company from 1996 to 2006, and I got involved in a project at the very end of that. And I decided to close my company based on that one job. I had had a lot of successful jobs before that. And then all of a sudden, I got a hold of a project. I had hired a sales guy. He was actually, I guess, my VP of sales, if you wanted to call that. And he brought me this job. And it was represented as something by the plant that once we took the PO and we took their deposit and everything, turned into something different. And long story short, there's a great write-up on the Automation Primer, www.automationprimer.com. You can actually look up The Bite Too Big to Chew. And it has a story of a machine that I was copying. I was duplicating a Japanese machine. And I spent $300,000 building an $80,000 machine. Okay, so The Bite Too Big to Chew. And part of the things that went into this, there were a lot of parts that were very difficult to get. That was part of it. Number two, we had never seen the machine on the floor actually run. And it turned out later there had been two of these machines built, and neither one of them ever ran. We thought we were duplicating a running machine, had everything that you needed for the machine. There's pictures of it in that blog. It was pretty cool to build, had a lot of detail to it. I had a little machine shop at the time, had a good machinist. One of the problems I ran into was I started investigating it. It was all in Japanese, which my wife is Japanese, so she could read everything. But all the drawings, there were no electronic copies of drawings. So first thing we had to do was duplicate all of the physical drawings and do them in CAD. And so I hired a guy. He was actually from China, but he could still read the kanji. And he put together the drawing package for it. We started building it. We started pricing things that had to be imported, worked closely with an importer. And by the time we were done, I felt obligated to finish this thing, even though it was somewhat misrepresented as far as what it was, and make it work. And I did make it work, but it cost me 300 grand, like I said, and we only made 80 off of it. Fortunately, we had some other jobs that were taking up the slack, but I realized at that time I did not want to manage people. I did not want to build capital intensive equipment. So financially, is it worth getting involved? That's an important question. Some of that is going to be based on how big are you, right? If you're a 15-person company, can you absorb a 30-person project, right? Can you do that? Do you have extra time? A lot of times, I think David was the one who called it the iron triangle. I think it was, what was it? Time, speed, and money, right? I believe those were the three things. And how fast can you do you want it fast? Do you want it cheap? Or do you want it good, right? I guess quality. That's the other thing. So I see a chat here. You got a few participants on here. Our label printers considered systems integration. How do you make it resilient as the office network needs to send commands to the printer? Well, that's not going to be real time, right? Because the office network is going to send the command to the printer if it's the office network, and it's not going to get to the printer in what I would call real time, but it doesn't necessarily need to. So that's a That's a really good question. I would consider it, yes, it is systems integration. I've put label printers out on lines and they haven't come from the office system. What they do is the office system sends a list of the labels to, I put them in a PLC and then the PLC controls the printer. And that is real time. But I have those queued up ahead of time. Sent from the Office MES system or ERP system, wherever those labels come from. In other words, we know what we're producing ahead of time, pretty real time. And then David put here, good, fast, and cheap. Yes, that's it. Do you want it good? Do you want it fast? Do you want it cheap? You can't have all three. You can basically have any of the two. If it's going to be good and fast, it is not going to be cheap. It's going to cost extra. It's going to be fast and cheap. It's probably not going to be good. Now, that depends on who's doing it. You can build things fast and cheap if you're a really big company and you've built a whole lot of them before, right? Then you're just duplicating something that you already have the design for. But if you don't have the design for it, for sure, you can't do all three of them. So that's a pretty good definition. So that's the only two messages I see there. But yes, so financially, is it worth getting involved? Receptiveness of the customer to ideas. That can be a problem. For one thing, you need to be able to explain your idea accurately. And to do that, it probably needs to be written. And then if you write it and you make it very long, is the customer going to read it? That's an interesting question too. I've run into that sort of thing pretty often. I will do a detailed quote. I'll put something that's 7 or 8 pages long, explaining exactly what my idea is, and then it goes to a bean counter who doesn't understand 90% of what I wrote, and they're just going for price anyway. So they're not necessarily looking for the new ideas. A lot of times the plant puts out a specification and there's a lot of details in the spec, and you don't have the time to necessarily investigate all those details, which goes back to my bite too big to chew, right? You kind of want the job. You make a very good estimate of what it's going to take to do it. And as you do more and more of these jobs, you gain more and more experience, and you're able to eliminate some of those unknowns and things, right? Unknowns and risks. That's a third little dot that I put down here. Lots of risk. The less you know, the more possible risk there is. I did a whole lot of machine building jobs in the 90s and early 2000s. And one of the things I learned was whatever the cutting edge was, I didn't want to be anywhere close to it. Okay. I wanted to be in my comfort zone. I did a lot of jobs that were I had never done before, right? Did a whole lot of gauging and measurement type jobs. I remember one that had 7 LVDTs on it. And the reason it had so many LVDTs was because you could not put the part in the fixture very accurately. It was kind of rounded, and the parts were all just a little bit different shape and warped. And so what I would do is actually measure the edges where the gasket went and calculate a plane, and then I had to calculate the intercept of that plane. And I had never done that before, and I think I was maybe 6 or 7 years out of school at the time, and didn't really know if my math would work, and actually went back to the University of Tennessee and brought it to the math department and talked to my old math professor. And he was like, I'm not exactly sure what you're doing here. It looks like it's mostly right, but I can't, and he was a PhD. And so he just said, best thing you can do is just build it and try it and keep tweaking with it till it works. And that's what I did. And I was lucky. It did work. Worked great. It allowed the operator to put the part in there as crooked as he wanted to. The LVDTs would come through and figure out where this floating gasket that came up on this little horn was supposed to be, and worked really well. I was proud of that one. So lots of unknowns, risks. You're always taking a chance when you're doing systems integration, unless you've done the exact same thing before. Is there existing documentation and software? That can be a major problem. If you don't have the software, then you better put the time in there to recreate whatever's in there. You better be able to document it. If you don't have the software, some PLCs you can upload software from. Most of the newer stuff Allen Bradley, you can definitely do that. Siemens, you can have problems. They have something called optimized data blocks now. And when you upload an optimized data block, you are not going to get the offsets for all the bits and everything. You're not going to know where the bits are in there. So if you want to use things like indirect addressing, it can be very problematic if you don't have the original program. And Siemens will actually tell you that. If you call the help desk, they'll say, well, do you have the original program? Nope, I don't have that. All I can do is go online. And their answer has always been, in their nice German way, well, maybe you are not supposed to have the software, right? Which is maybe true. Maybe it's not password protected, but if they didn't give you the original copy of the program, maybe you aren't supposed to have the original copy of the program. Usually what happens is they've kind of lost it or corrupted it or changed it a lot since and then never backed it up. So do you have existing documentation and software for the line? Do you have electrical drawings? I told you my story of that. That's a major problem, right? If I don't have a CAD copy of the electrical drawings, then I have to recreate them myself. That is super time consuming, takes a lot of work. I do that a lot at ABD because they do not have drawings for any of their original equipment. So I have created drawings for a lot of it. Usually as I go, I create drawings of the new things that I'm doing, and then I go in and I make a rudimentary IO list and do some drawings for the old stuff too, just so they have it. It all goes onto the server. Know your own abilities. That's a tough one. I think when I was younger, I overestimated my abilities. I thought I can learn anything, and most things I was pretty able to learn. I realize now there are things I will probably never learn. I'm going to say I will never be an IT guy. I'll learn it to some degree, but I will never be an IT guy. I will probably never get into that upper level of ERP and MES very much. I'll never be an SAP guy. I love learning new things myself. So I kind of know where I am, but then again, I'm an old guy. So it's taken a long time to get to this point, but I kind of know what I can do and what I can't do. Now, conveying that to a customer can be a problem, right? Do they know what you can do? Do they believe that you can do things, or are they misinterpreting what you think you can do, right? Sometimes I'll tell people, man, the programming part of this is easy. I could probably, work on this whole system and create lots of good code for you in 2 or 3 days. You'd be surprised how much I can get done in that amount of time. And then they'll come back and say, well, we don't want to pay for that extra time. Well, you're paying for it anyway, right? If you just work on this one small part of the system right now, and then you decide to do something to the other part of the system later, well, you haven't done the upfront planning to tie those two things together. You tried to take it one little piece of string at a time, and it's all full of knots, and you untied one knot, but while you were doing that, maybe you created another knot somewhere else. So that's kind of what this illustrates here. So these are all considerations, I would say, if you're going to do systems integration. What kind of things should you think about if you get into these jobs? The more you know, the better shape you're going to be in quoting some of these jobs. I believe that is the last. No, I do have one more slide here. Right? And I kind of put this in here. Used stuff. I've actually been thinking about what can I do with some of this used stuff, right? There may be a buyer for it. For some of it, you see these big carts here. And believe it or not, General Mills is thinking about maybe getting some of these because they've taken a class using this stuff before. The problem's going to be figuring out what of this they want. You can see all these just boxes and boxes of stuff that are filling up my shop here. I am building a garage to keep a lot of this and some other things in, and then I'm going to get my little shop back here. You can see all the pegboard and things. Can't really see all of it along this wall, but I've got some new tools. This is going to be basically empty. It's a nice epoxy floor, lots of tools in there so I can build stuff again. I don't think I'm going to build machines like I used to. Even things like this are, for training, a bit overdone. Would I build this kind of thing or this kind of thing for customers again? Yeah, I think in the future, this is really a lot of what I'd like to do. I like these little systems. This took exactly 1 month to build, from the day that I got the PO to ordering the stuff. And I actually ordered this stuff when I was at ABD. I was down in Miami, ordered most of it. It was here when I got back. And even with all this extra time that I spent on the systems integration, took exactly 1 month. Now, it only had 2 screens of HMIs. PLC program took me all of, to run this little toy factory here. You can see videos of this online. PLC program took me, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. So this is what I meant about I can write a whole lot of programming in a very short period of time because I've done it for a long time. So this really represents a whole factory. Now it's only got, I think, 10 inputs and eight outputs. But to make this run only took a few hours because I sequence everything. And writing sequences is just kind of second nature to me. I think the HMIs maybe took longer, right? Making all these little switches work. This was all part tracking, right? So I talked about part tracking, put something in my blog about this. This shows the physical photo eyes, and then these are virtual positions. So you can write a part into any one of these positions and take it out because you can physically remove it with your fingers, right? So I allowed them to write parts in, and then it automatically puts parts in as you down stack them from this little down stacker. It will light up all lights and show that there's a part there, and then verifies it once it gets to one of the photo eyes. So these little abbreviations are PE for photo eyes. So I love building these little things. Got me some nice new little tools to do all that. Instead of having a machinist, I'm my own machinist. And now have of course, a 3D printer and things that I didn't have back when I was doing this. I had to go out and have some of these parts machined. And of course, when I had my own machine shop, I had a guy that was doing all that for me. So I don't know that I'm going to get into all that necessarily again, but I like the idea of building things. I like the idea of even rebuilding some of these into trainers or building small machines for people. For one thing, I can do it here. It's a little less travel. So I have a lot of this used stuff. Anybody who's interested in things like PLC5s, I think there's 10 of them here. And if these folks don't buy them from General Mills, I'll be selling them piecemeal. I have come to a kind of an agreement with the owner of the equipment where I can sell it. And again, that's why I'm kind of building the 25 by 24 by 10 or 12 foot tall garage next door to my facility to put all this stuff in and maybe get into buying and selling stuff or rebuilding things out of it. You can see here, they did this out of wood. This is a little bit of, it's not systems integration as such, but all these got a bunch of extra micrologics. Can I use used equipment in systems integration? If the customer knows that that's what you're doing, this company, right? The company that I do all this stuff with, they use used equipment. They'll buy it off eBay, Amazon and eBay. So they don't have a problem with using used equipment. They'll take the risk because you could probably buy 5 PLCs for the cost of one, and they're used. And if it breaks, you just put a new one in there. They're notorious for doing things as inexpensively as possible, including using me for systems integration. I'm not a terribly expensive person to use. So one of the reasons that I'm, of course, doing this webinar on this topic is, yes, I am available for small jobs. I will evaluate them based on these things. Is it worth getting involved? Is the customer receptive? Do I know anything about the systems? Are there risks to what I'm doing, right? Risks include not getting paid. That's a very important risk. You don't want to take that risk. You'd like to be paid. And so far I've been paid for every job I've done except for 2. Both companies went bankrupt. And so I didn't get paid for the jobs. One was a startup, and they built plastic fence posts at the time back in the 90s for Home Depot. It was a new thing. They extruded these and they cut them off. And I've seen those plastic fence posts everywhere, but this was the first company that I think got into that. And for whatever reason, that failed. I got pieces of my equipment back, I think, by the time we were done. And then another one was, it was a company that did radioactive metal processing. It was called Molten Metals in Oak Ridge, and they went bankrupt. And my equipment, they said, was radioactive, so I could not get my equipment back. I did not go verify that, but it was in Oak Ridge, so I tend to believe it. Don't even know exactly what the equipment did, right? I built all the infrastructure and programmed it, but I did not put it in. It was subcontracted through another company. So anyway, yeah, lots of used stuff that, yes, I could use for systems integration if people were willing to use used stuff. I don't think I'd put a PLC5 into anybody's plant on purpose, but it's a possibility. Now, these old HMIs, right, got a bunch of these, and panel views worked back in the day. They were fine. If you're willing to have a black and white panel view, people can save money on this stuff. At the same time, I use WineView, WineTech, WineView, HMIs down in Miami all the time, and they work great. And they're inexpensive. They're probably less expensive even than used ones of these, and they look better. They're color, 7-inch, 10-inch touchscreens, and they work great. So, all right, next webinar, June the 14th, 2025, barring unforeseen incidents, unknown topic. As usual at this point, I don't know what I'll be talking about. Probably something I'm involved in, maybe BNR controllers. Maybe I'll give a report on what BNR actually is, because I've never really seen their programming, and I'll try to take lots of screenshots of it. And I've heard kind of that it's complicated. They have something called, I believe it's Automation Studio, and that's what we're going to be using is Automation Studio to program these BNR controllers. And the one that they've got is just running a shrink machine. I don't think I'll be in Florida before June the 14th, but it's possible. And so I won't have hands-on with that particular shrink machine, but I'll have gone through the class. So that is the intent. Any questions? Anybody? I see a few people on here. Any questions for anybody? Go ahead and speak up or forever hold your peace. You can also do it in the chat. I see a few folks on here. Oh my gosh, I see Albert Fernandez on here. He should be the real, not the meme Poppy. I'll call him the AI Poppy. He can do some stuff with AI image generation. He's been doing it for a long time. I actually learned a little bit of how to get into that back during the OT Skatecon almost a year ago. I just kind of interrogated him while I was giving him a ride to the conference, and he told me, "Oh, I do this just by talk. I can just talk into my phone and do it." And it was like, really? How's all that done? And now I know a lot more about it. Like I said, a little bit of AI on here. Let's see. Did I create any other AI on here? Yeah, this is AI. Of course, it's not a real picture of me. It doesn't even really look like me, but I think it used me as a... Will I be presenting at OT Skatecon? I will. I did last year. I did 2 presentations last year. I'm doing only 1 this year. I'm taking... Tim Wilburn did PLCs last year, so I'm stepping into some deep shoes. I'm doing PLCs and I'm doing I/O devices. I was able to cheat and use my I/O device presentation from last year for part of it. So that's half of it is just kind of what I did last year, but much quicker. And yes, I'm doing PLCs and have a pretty good, again, I cheated there because I've written 2 or 3 books on PLCs. So I was able to use all images from my books. That's a good way to cheat for PowerPoints, right? Just drag the images in there. And I like this, right? PowerPoint does this now. It creates suggestions for your screens, and then you can modify the suggestions. So it did this, put this little curve thing in here that I wouldn't have known how to do in PowerPoint. I didn't know how to do that. So don't know who A. Godry is, but yes, looking forward to it. So you will be there. That's awesome. And I know Albert will be there, and I know David will be there. They're both presenting, I believe. James Hoover, I've seen him on some of these webinars. Don't know if he's going to be attending, but Yeah, OT Skatecon's a blast. I had a really good time last year. Met some of these folks like David and Albert, staying in the Airbnb. We had a little Airbnb that they put us up in. I may be staying in my camper this year. If I can get it up and running and get the plumbing fixed. People ask me, well, how can you stay in a camper in Houston? Well, it's got air conditioning and you know, a little kitchen and all that kind of stuff. And I've enjoyed the camping trips I've taken. It's hot and muggy down there, but as long as I can sleep and everything. I parked it in Miami in the plant, and actually, uh, the one thing I was missing, my plumbing, I didn't have a hookup for it, so I didn't have a way to take a shower. I'm going to stay in a campground in Houston if I go there, so I'll have a shower, but didn't have a shower, so I was using a giant 2-bay sink that was outside in the maintenance am about 6 o'clock every morning. I'd be taking one of those, what do they call it? A sponge shower. So am I going to automate next week? No, I am not. Oh, I like this in the chat. So Albert, Albert put, this is an example of some of the stuff Albert does. If you haven't seen this, look in the chat, and he put a drippy owl. Whenever there's an owl, that's supposed to represent me, and that's a radioactive melting owl. It appears with a radioactive signal on the PLC. That's pretty cool. I am not going to automate. I went last year and met a lot of good folks there. This one's in Detroit. You know, I could possibly go next week. I had kind of set aside next week for possibly this job with David, but I don't think that job's going to be ready next week. We have to install some photo eyes and things to continue on with that. And automate. I just, you know, Detroit, one thing is it's a little harder to find a good place to stay there. I've never been to a trade show in Detroit. It's downtown, probably somewhere in one of their conference centers. I teach up there a lot near the airport, and it's okay down there, but traffic, like anywhere, is tough. And I don't know about if Detroit has a train system. In Chicago, I stay in Oak Park, and I take the train into the McCormick Center. It's a straight shot. So just I think it's the Red Line or whatever it is, and it takes you straight into the McCormick Center. So I like doing that, bring my wife up there, but I don't think my wife's a fan of Detroit either. The only times we've been there was during, I think 2008, 2009, we went up there to the Hard Rock, and the whole downtown was deserted. So it was a little depressing. But now, not planning on going to automate this year. I know a lot of folks that are. A lot of people have chimed in on LinkedIn. Vlad Romanov's going to be there. Ali G. Some of the folks from OT Skatecon will be there. Don't know if anybody else here is going. But yeah, next week. Now, David, you're in Lexington. That's not too far from to Detroit, but you got to get time off. But I don't know. 6 hours. Yeah, that's pretty far still. I prefer Detroit over Chicago. Interesting. Stay in Allen Park. I don't know where Allen Park is. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, Chicago's bigger. Detroit, you know, I taught up there this year, and I drove up to Traverse City after that. Not going to make it next week. Just got buried with some additional requests. Yeah, well, additional requests, we'll do that. I am getting my garage put in the week after that, and I need to probably prep the area a little bit, dig up some plants if I want to keep them, because otherwise they're going to rip them all out. And they're pouring a big slab, and then I'm building this garage, and I'll put all that old used stuff in there and all that stuff. So yeah, anybody needs any panel views or lots of control net, device net, remote IO based components. There's going to be a lot of that for sure will still be around. Just rolls and rolls of that yellow cable. No blue hose that I found, but lots and lots of pieces of communication based stuff. So I'll be getting rid of a lot of that. And these carts, you know, if they buy all these at General Mills, that would be great. But if not, I like the carts. They're actually pretty sturdy, but they're hard to move. I can't put even one of them in my car. So that's going to be a problem. They have to be loaded up a ramp and into a truck to move. They weigh 500 to 800 pounds, somewhere in there. Anyway, next webinar, June the 14th, 2025. May do it on BNR, may do it on something else. Just depends on how things work out. But other than that, thanks for showing up, and see you all next time.